Hey folks, today I'm going to talk about stuff you don't want in your bird photography, things that make bird photography look like random, non-deliberate photography. Let's go to a photo that you never want to see in your bird photography. Let's check it out on screen. All right, we have a photo of an American robin. And like I said, this is a photo you pretty much never want to see in your bird photography. Why is that? Well, because first of all, I'll tell you one thing. This photo is sharp. Look at this photo detail. You got a lot of feather detail. You can see the individual strands of feathers. This is a zoom at a 100%. I'll show you a zoom at 200%, 400% here. You can see a ton of feather detail. Like, this is the sort of feather detail you want to see in your bird photography. Nevertheless, what's wrong with this photo? The bird is sharp, but we have all kinds of nasty background elements here. They're just random, all over the place sticks. There's this huge bright spot behind the bird. This bright spot, I don't even know what it is. It's serving no purpose but to distract away from the main subject. Bright elements, there's nothing worse than bright elements that serve no purpose in your photo because they're going to draw the eye immediately. You also have these foreground elements. The foot is a little bit cut off. But basically the main problem with this photo is actually that there's just so much randomness. And I want to talk a little bit about this concept of randomness in bird photography, okay? Randomness. When you have an element that's not part of some sort of conceptual contiguous whole. Let me show you another photo that's a lot better. I'll come back to this robin example, but I want to just take a little diversion about this continuous topic. So let's go to another photo. Here is a photo of a brewer's blackbird, and it really illustrates this contiguous concept here. Now let's look at this branch on the right here. Really pay close attention to this branch on the right. You have this branch. Imagine, just for a second, just imagine if this flower part, where my mouse is right now, if this flower part did not exist. Just imagine if it was empty. This stick on the right would be very distracting, or at least somewhat unusual. But because it's sort of connected visually to the rest of this elements, this entire flower branch area forms part of a contiguous whole. When something forms a contiguous whole, it becomes a single concept because it's connected visually. So the problem is isolated distractions or isolated elements are going to be far more apparent or distracting than things that form part of a contiguous whole. So if you have to have some stuff like this that show the environment, that's very interesting, but it's better that they sometimes form part of a contiguous whole. If this flower again wasn't here, it wouldn't be very good, or it would be less good. And then you have a nice clean composition of a brewer's blackbird. Okay, let's go back to the American robin example. Here you have the exact opposite. You have stuff that isn't part of a contiguous whole, random things that appear in the background. Let's go to a different example of an American robin. Here you have a slightly better example. You have an American robin in the grass, but there's still some problems with it. See, now this photo shows the environment of the robin in the grass, but you still have some problems here. You have this darker area here that's fairly prominent. You have some out of focus elements that look kind of nasty. You have this upper background element. It's almost as if there's too much grass in the photo and it's too overwhelming. Here's another photo that exhibits the same kind of problem. Now the background is a little bit more clean. It's a little bit more clean, but you still have a bit of a problem here that the grassy elements, there's some stuff in the foreground that's pretty distracting. There's just too much grass. If you were to draw a bird like this, you wouldn't want to just draw a nice portrait of a bird and then fill the whole frame with grass. It doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like you're putting too much of a good thing into the frame. Let's look at one more picture that kind of does this grass thing a little bit better. Here, now we have a photo of an American robin again, but it's much cleaner, much nicer. Why? Because you still have that grass background element on the bottom here, but the difference is that there's only a little bit of it in focus, so it catches your eye a lot more. It's not overwhelming the photo. and you have a clean background that kind of gives more background subject separation. Here, the two side by side. The photo on the left actually contains more in focus grass, but the photo on the right has more of a grass element to it because you can kind of feel the grass more. The photo on the left is so much grass you don't feel it anymore. It's too shocking. So that's another good thing to keep in mind. If you're going to show a background element, it's better to apply the same principles to the background as you do to the subject. You want to have some isolation between the subject and whatever else is in the photo. Same thing with an environmental element. You want some isolation between part of that environmental element that you want to show and the rest of the photo too. That's why this photo on the right works a lot better, because it shows the grass, but only just enough to give you the sense of grass. And it's not an overwhelming sort of vomit of grass right in your face, you know? That's sort of like the basic idea behind that. Let's go to another example. Here we have a ring-billed gull in an ephemeral pool. All right, ring-billed gulls are some of my favorite birds. I love ring-billed gulls. But there's a problem with this photo. Let's take a look. Okay, so we have, biggest problem I can see right now is this errant sort of out of focus water area right next to the bill, right next to the face. So you have this beautiful form of the bird, but you have this out of focus element that's kind of a little bit too distracting. I know bird photos, they can't be perfectly arranged like if they're in a studio, but you can do a lot to alleviate some of these problems, really. I mean, this is a little bit too egregious for my taste. Okay, let's look at it again. All these distracting elements, you've also got this nice sort of feature of the pond is too close to the bird. If the bird were a little bit over to the right and I framed it a little differently, it would be a lot better, because this beautiful feature of the pond right here is just too close to the bird. You don't want these two elements intersecting randomly like that. Again, would you draw it like this? Would you want to draw a picture where this dark blue line is intersecting right at the bottom of the bird? I don't think so. There's lots of good things to like about this photo, like the reflections, like all that stuff, you know, but there's just so much wrong with it. And there are these elements here, these bright elements in the background. Although you have a nice catch light in the eye, there's just, it's a little bit too distracting. This next photo gives a little bit better of an idea of what you want to look for. Here you still have the environment. You got the water and you got the sand. You got the reflection. But now the boundary between the water and the sand is sufficiently far away from the bird's head so that you have a little bit of breathing room between your subject and the distinctive elements of your photo. All the elements are clearly represented. You got the water, you got the sand, you got the boundary between the water and the sand separated from the bird, and the bird is cleanly distinct in the water, and you have its reflection in the water too. So let's compare the two side by side, and you'll see the difference between these two photos. The photo on the left is just a little bit more impactful because it just doesn't have all those distractions, and the concepts you're trying to illustrate are all put in a nice arranged way that make it look deliberate. Let's look at one more photo again. Here's the photo of the ring-billed gull. Now it's taken from a little bit of a lower angle, so you see a little bit more of the subject separated from the background, yet you still have some of the environment. You have this nice sort of beautiful sand slightly in focus, so you still see it standing in sand. It's a different approach. Let's compare the two. Again, you see the effectiveness of the photo on the left versus the photo on the right. The photo on the right looks messy. It looks non-deliberate. It looks randomly snapped. The photo on the left looks like it was taken with care, and it was. I really, in this case, was looking all around for background distractions, for good backgrounds, and different positions that really would illustrate the subject. And that's something you really have to do, you know. Birds might seem random, the environment might seem random, but there are so many things you can do to enhance your photography of wildlife, and that is looking around constantly for better backgrounds and better ways to arrange things as deliberately as possible. One more quick example, red-winged blackbird. I love red-winged blackbirds. Let's look at a picture of a red-winged blackbird. Here you have a red-winged blackbird on one of these cattails. It looks very nice, the background's clean, but there's a problem again. This very distinctive element here is right below the tail. You don't want distinctive elements, especially the most distinctive element here is this thing that's sticking the point is sticking out, and points are very distinctive. You don't want that very close to the bird. It looks like the bird is about to get skewered. You don't want that. Now let's take another look at the bird. I just waited, in this case, for the bird to turn, and I shifted the camera a little bit. You'll see an entirely different composition. Here's the same thing. It's on the same cattail, but now the composition is much nicer because the point isn't about to jab that poor bird in the butt. You got such a nice photo now. Here you see that the point is sufficiently far away from the tail. The background is a lot cleaner and the elements are more separated. You see pieces of the environment, but they're not hurting the general form of the bird. And you can have more environment. This is not to say that your photos always have to have a completely blown out background. Here's another shot of a red-winged blackbird. It has more of the environment, but still the environmental elements aren't distracting so much with the bird. Now you could argue that maybe this out of focus element is a little bit distracting. Maybe I can reduce the contrast in these lines a little bit to make it less distracting, but basically that's the general idea. You don't always want your wildlife photography to be completely like portrait photography with blown out backgrounds. You can include parts of the environment, but that doesn't mean to just randomly snap a picture right when you see a bird, right when you see an animal. Instead, what you should do is try and sort of find the right camera position, the right angle, or just wait for the bird or the animal to put themselves in the right space so that you can kind of arrange the background elements to be pleasing and support the overall look of the subject. Because when you see a subject in real life, you're going to get the essence of it from its movements, from what it's doing, from its many different positions. And the goal is to capture that essence in a single rectangular frame. Taking a random snap at a random moment is not going to do that. You have to find a way of putting that essence into that rectangular frame. And that means waiting and arranging the background just right, as I've talked about today, using those different concepts to make sure that your subject is clearly illustrated in its environment or in a portrait or whatever. So I hope that helped you with your bird photography and wildlife photography, and I'll see you again next time.